right. All right, welcome everyone. I guess we'll give a couple minutes to let some attendees to enter the room. Just give another minute or two.
I thought the 2,500-acre deal was pretty interesting. And
Goes. We'll just wait one more minute. Let a few folks come in. Get started. All right, you guys want to kick it off here? I think we've got all of our participants in the room. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on securing federal funds, insights and strategies for EV charging infrastructure. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nicole Ilya. I'm the Director of Multifamily at Converge Services. We're delighted to have you with us today, and we're delighted to partner with BTC Power to bring you this valuable session. Before I begin, I'd like to share a little bit about Converge Services and what we offer. So we specialize in negotiating telecom agreements for multifamily owners and operators. Our expertise helps property owners secure the best rates and terms for telecom services, ensuring cost-effective and high-quality technology solutions for your properties. Our goal is to provide innovative and strategic representation to help our clients thrive in a rapidly evolving technological landscape. Today, we're thrilled to have two distinguished experts with us. Amanda Wood, Senior Federal Advocacy Director at Becker, and Patty Delano, an expert on government and public policy from BTC Power. They'll be sharing their invaluable knowledge with us and experience on securing federal funding for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. We'll also have time at the end of our webinar for questions. So please add any questions you may have to the chat, and we'll be sure to answer those at the end of the session. Thanks again for joining us, and let's dive in.
Great, thank you so much. Let's get started. On to the first slide. Okay, let me give you a little bit of my background. I am a federal lobbyist and federal funding consultant based in Washington, D.C. My background is Capitol Hill. I was a Senate legislative director, and my specialty is really federal funding. So I work with lots and lots of agencies throughout the country, public agencies, nonprofits, and others as they seek to leverage federal funding for important community initiatives. And I have been using this slide for a while because we have a long history of federal funding for important community initiatives. In a typical year, there are over 1,000 federal grant programs through 26 federal agencies, providing more than $400 billion to public agencies. But let's go on to the next slide, because this is not a typical year. We have had, in the past 30 months, $7 trillion in extraordinary federal spending. So that started back in April 2020 with the CARES Act, then CRRSA, a big omnibus relief bill, the American Rescue Plan Act, offering very flexible funding to local governments, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act with $1 trillion in a really broad expansion of what we would call infrastructure, Inflation Reduction Act, and then the CHIPS Act in August 2022. And all of these are bills that we're continuing to spend down for the benefit of infrastructure in this country. To give you a sense of scale, so we have $7 trillion in 30 months. Back in 2009, when we had the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, that was a single package, just one stimulus bill of $787 billion. And wow, did that seem like a lot of money then? But we've come a long way since then. Let's go to the next slide. So we'll talk about, what is DC thinking with all this new money? It really has been a change in philosophy in many ways. Some of the things that DC is thinking about really relate to our topic today. One is decarbonization and resiliency. Boosting confidence in the availability of charging infrastructure. So when we see the $7.5 billion in charging funding, we're really seeing an effort to make sure that folks feel that there's a real network of charging available to them in their communities and on the road so that they feel confident about buying EVs. And as I said, we're greatly broadening the definition of what essential infrastructure is. It is no longer just roads and bridges and water. It is broadband. It is EV charging. It is so many other things. So with this huge new investment also comes a huge amount of flexibility in how these federal funds are spent. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so today we're really focusing on the opportunity at hand, which is the US DOT FY24 and 25 Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program. So this is part of $2.5 billion in community and corridor charging that is set to be released over 5 years. We're in round 2. So the first round was 2002, 2003. We're now in sort of in the mode of responding to a solicitation that will cover this fiscal year and next fiscal year. And then there'll be one more round, we believe. There was so much interest in this program in the first round that in addition to $800 million for new projects in this round, they've set aside $500 million for resubmission of projects from round 1. That resubmission deadline has already passed. But it just shows you there's been just a huge amount of interest in this. It's very, very competitive. So funds are for both urban and rural communities. And all of these funds are for publicly accessible charging, including downtown areas and local neighborhoods, particularly in underserved and disadvantaged communities. So over 5 years, again, $2.5 billion with $1.3 billion of it coming out in this round. Next slide, please. Okay. So there are a couple of different funding categories under the CFI program. All grants are due by August 28th, so we have just a little under a month to get these in. There's the community program, which is for really localized charging, and then the alternative fuel corridor grants or corridor program for larger projects closer to highways typically. We're going to be really focused primarily on the community charging and fueling grants during my slides. I think those are going to be the best fit for the sort of work that you all are doing in the community. Next slide. Okay, so a few key requirements. Obviously, these are projects designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to expand or fill gaps in access to infrastructure. All charging has to be publicly accessible, and it can be on a public road or any other publicly accessible location. So it can be on private property, but publicly accessible. There is a 20% non-federal match requirement, and this will support both DC fast charging and level 2 chargers. So you have some options here. Next slide. Okay, the eligible applicants for CFI grants. These are going to be the folks who are actually submitting the application, regardless of its location, are going to be public agencies. So units of local governments, port authorities, MPOs. Most frequently, the applicants for these are cities or counties, the cities and counties where you all are located, and you can certainly partner with your city or county in order to submit a funding application that they will load into grants.gov and put it on your behalf for charging potentially on private property as well. Next slide, please. Okay, and here we talk about those public-private partnerships. So this charging infrastructure must be publicly accessible, but need not be on public property. So this is your opportunity to partner with local government applicants, and really your locations will enhance their competitiveness. One of the key focus areas of this funding is making sure there's more access to charging infrastructure in multifamily housing communities. And you all can be that key in pursuing funding along with your local government partner to really giving them those bonus points as their application is considered. The other thing that you may want to consider doing, there is a 20% match requirement for the local government applicant. You all could offer to be that match provider for charging on your property, which is sort of a great opportunity for you all to get, 80% of your charging infrastructure on your property paid for by the federal government. Next slide. Okay, so there are some different focus areas within the community program, and your application will fall into one of these. There is a multimodal hubs and shared use fleets and services. So this would be sort of if your community is located sort of by a multimodal center of some sort. I think probably the urban suburban area charging and fueling infrastructure solutions use case or focus area is going to be the best fit for you, because it really does focus on multi-unit dwellings and homes without driveways or garages. So really a perfect fit for that use case. There's also rural area charging, and then there's one that also includes access to fleet vehicles. Though this is primarily for public charging, the fleet vehicle would be sort of incidental. But I think we're probably going to focus mostly for our purposes on that urban suburban area charging and fueling solutions. Next slide. Okay, to give you a sense of eligible project costs. So it can be for the acquisition and installation of the EV charging, any construction or reconstruction that relates to this project, any planning, feasibility analysis, preliminary engineering and design work, contracting with a private entity for the acquisition, construction, installation, maintenance, or operation of this, and then also educational community engagement activities to develop and implement education programs. So that may be something you want to include in your application as well, in consultation with the local government applicant. Next slide. Okay, so there are several selection priority areas. I think, we probably hit on two of these pretty frequently with the communities that you all are involved in. So focus areas are rural areas, low and moderate income neighborhoods, and communities with a low ratio of private parking spaces to households, or a high ratio of multi-unit dwellings to single-family homes. So really giving these charging infrastructure a bang for its buck, because you're hitting on, multifamily communities where there'll be a great deal of folks who can access this on a day-to-day basis. Next slide. Okay, so key scoring and merit criteria are safety. These are really merit criteria that we see throughout US DOT programs. So safety, climate change, resilience, and sustainability, equity, and justice for you. And that's really equity writ large. It is about making sure that people in all sorts of income levels have access to EV charging. Workforce development, job quality, and wealth creation. So that would be, probably more on the EV charging infrastructure manufacturer side, showing that these are, are built in the United States and that have a workforce development component. And then CFI program vision, which is very broad, but really speaks to, I think, most of all, that climate change, resilience, sustainability speaks to access for underserved folks. Next slide. Okay, so we learned some things from round one. Round one was released back in January. There were 47 projects, $622 million in awards, and which really led to the implementation of almost $6 million. I'm sorry, 6,000 charging stations through this funding. Minimum for applications on the community side is $500,000. We did find that there was a trend towards larger projects requiring more funds. Those were favored. 30 of those 47 projects emphasize station location in or walking distance from disadvantaged communities. And then 8 projects plan to connect their chargers to other modes of transportation. So a real emphasis on on sort of larger projects. So be ambitious, think big, on walking distance or location within disadvantaged communities. So a couple things to keep in mind. Next slide. Okay, some things that weren't really apparent when we first looked at this opportunity that I just wanted to highlight. So you cannot place infrastructure in a place that requires a payment to enter. So no parking lots that require payment. For community grants, they really do want you to use up to 5% of that for public education and outreach within the community. Make sure folks are accessing this great new asset. You want to address how your project aligns with the state plan for NEVI. NEVI is the $5 billion program that's the corollary to this program that is really state focused and is focused primarily on highways. So really showing how your project ties into that greater highway network. All applications will be considered both CFI and CFI community and corridor awards. So if you submit, they'll find the best fit for your project. And then if you're collecting revenue from charging, which you can, all funding must return to the community's EV charging program. So it's going back to your local government partner to reinvest in EV charging infrastructure. Next slide. Okay, so if you haven't already, we have about a month. I'll remind you again, you as a developer, as somebody who is managing multifamily housing are not going to be the actual applicant. You're going to be a really important partner to those local governments though. So if you haven't already and you're interested in partnering with local government, engage with them now, whether it's the community development director, facilities director, sustainability director at your city or county. They may already be working on site selection, and you want to make sure that you're in the mix and really demonstrate to them that you all can enhance their application. You want to prioritize locations with high traffic counts near major highways and that focus on equitable access. You guys are really key to demonstrating equitable access. And then I would, think about offering to the local government that you all will provide that 20% match. Again, an extraordinary opportunity for you all to implement EV charging infrastructure with the federal government picking up 80% of the cost. Next slide. Okay, so some key indicators of funding success. So this is not about a wish list, a shopping list. It's not about budget line items. It's about how you're going to improve access in your community. So when you're talking with your local government partner, talk about your community and how this could really enhance the services that you're providing to them. So show a local commitment to this effort. Do you have community partners, local nonprofits who'd want to write letters of support? I would certainly recommend that, both within the government and non-government. Compile data to support your requests. Make sure you have those numbers. Make sure you know, the demographics of the community that you are working with. People have asked me, like, we don't have a lot of people driving EVs in our community. Are we eligible? Yes, absolutely. It is not about how many people are driving EVs in your community. It's about the fact that putting this infrastructure in place will help them to overcome a hurdle to making that purchase. So, so just, don't feel like if you don't have a lot of EV drivers right now, that it's not the time to do this. It's exactly the time to do this. This is what they have in mind. And then arm your federal elected officials to advocate for you. Your members of Congress and senators really want to advocate and bring as much funding as possible back to their districts or states. Something we do every day. We prepare draft letters of support. We reach out to congressional delegations. It's certainly something that I'm happy to help with and guide you through that process. It's essential in these highly competitive grants. That congressional oversight or nudge can certainly be the difference maker. And I think, are we heading on? Let's head on to the next slide. I think I may be passing it on at this point to Patty. Patty, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Amanda. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, just fine. You're doing great.
Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm the business development manager with BTC Power, focused on government and funding opportunities. Just to give you a little bit of background on BTC Power, we're a leading manufacturer of electric vehicle charging systems based in California. We design both AC level 2 and DC fast chargers for operating private, commercial, workplace, and highway applications. So I'm going to run through available funding for EV chargers and discuss equipment requirements that are needed to qualify for funding. You can go to the next slide. So currently there's $7.5 billion of federal funding that is available over 5 years to support EV charging infrastructure. $5 billion of that is for the NEVI formula program that it allocates the federal funding to states to deploy EV charging along designated alternate fuel corridors. So each state is responsible for implementing their own EV charging deployment plans and awarding funding to eligible applicants, which include both private and public entities. The remaining $2.5 billion is for the CFI program. The goal of the program is to fill gaps in the national charging and alternate fueling network by providing both the corridor and community funding opportunities. So as Amanda mentioned, there is currently $1.3 billion available in round 2, and we're expecting one additional round after that. So to summarize, NEVI is a state-focused program that provides EV charging along major highways, and CFI is a grant program that complements NEVI to ensure equitable access to EV charging across communities and highways. We can go to the next slide. And so I'm just going to give a little background on the NEVI program. NEVI covers up to 80% of eligible costs related to EV charging infrastructure projects. So these costs include the charging station equipment, make-ready work, upgrades to existing chargers to meet NEVI requirements, and operations and maintenance expenses. Applicants are responsible for acquiring, installing, owning, operating, and maintaining the EV charging equipment funded by the NEVI program. They are also required to provide a minimum 20% cost match for NEVI funding. So this means that they must contribute at least 20% of the total project costs from non-federal sources. The NEVI program includes equity and justice 40 initiatives. The goal is to make sure that 40% of NEVI benefits go to disadvantaged, low-income, rural, and tribal communities. This focus on equity is all about making sure that everyone has fair access to transportation and EV charging, especially in underserved areas. So the initial funding under this program is allocated to the build out of those AFCs, laying out the foundation for a national EV charging network. Once those national AFCs are completed and fully built out, any remaining funding from the NEVI program can be used to support additional EV charging infrastructure on other public roads and locations. So as mentioned before, each state is responsible for awarding funding and site selection based on their deployment plans. You can go to the next slide, please. And then going back to the CFI program, eligible infrastructure for the CFI program includes EV charging and 3 other types of alternate fueling infrastructure, including hydrogen, natural gas, and propane fueling. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Minimum Standards and Requirements Rule 23 CFR Par 680, that definitely is a mouthful, applies to all of the CFI EV infrastructure. And this specifies the technical requirements that applies to all of the EV charging stations. And we can go to the next slide. So just going through some of these requirements, which include the connector types, power levels, number of charging ports per location, uptime requirements, payment methods, data submission, network connectivity, and publicly available information such as having the charging price displayed. In addition, there are workforce requirements to make sure that the installation and also the operation and maintenance of the equipment are done by qualified workers. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a NEVI compliant DC charger. So one of the first requirements, and then for some reason it looks like some of the information is not coming up. So I'll just kind of read through it. But so one of the first requirements is meeting the Build America, Buy America requirement, which prioritizes the use of American-made products and materials for federally funded infrastructure projects. This also promotes domestic manufacturing and supports the U.S. economy. Another requirement is a minimum power output of 150 kilowatt per port. This high power charging capability enables fast and efficient charging for EVs, reducing the charging times for EV drivers. For DC, chargers must include a permanently attached CCS1 connector with options for additional connectors such as NACs to ensure compatibility with a wide range of EVs such as Tesla. Also, NEVI compliant chargers must provide secure payment methods, including contactless payment options. This allows EV drivers to easily use chargers and make payments securely. Chargers must be compatible with Open Charge Point Protocol 2.0.1. This ensures compatibility and communication between different EV charging networks and systems, allowing integration between those different EV charging networks. Also, the chargers must be designed so that they can securely switch between those charging networks and without making any changes to the hardware. So that means if your hardware is currently using one network, but you decide you want to change to another network, the hardware needs to be able to support that change without any updates to the hardware. It just will be able to do that automatically. And then also the NEVI standards require a minimum uptime of 97%. So what this means is that the charging stations should be operational and available for use at least 97% of the time. Next slide. So requirements for AC level 2 chargers include the Build America, Buy America requirements, and in addition, also being Energy Star certified. Also provide secure payment options, including the contactless payment. For level 2, the power requirement is a minimum 6 kilowatt per port. As with DC chargers, the L2 chargers must allow interoperability and comply with the OCPP 2.0.1. And the connector requirement for level 2 chargers is the SAE J1772 connector, which is the standard for North America. And then we can go to the next slide. So if you don't qualify for CFI funding, there is another important federal incentive, which is the federal 30C EV charger tax credit. This is also known as the alternate fuel infrastructure tax credit. It's gone through some changes over the years, and it was most recently renewed after its expiration. So with this tax credit, applicants can receive a credit of up to 30% of the total cost, or up to $100,000 for commercial EV chargers, infrastructure, and installation costs. So you're eligible to receive the tax credit for installing EV charging infrastructure at your facility. Also, certain tax exempt entities such as state, local, tribal, and other qualifying tax exempt organizations may also qualify. The chargers must be installed in locations meeting specific census tract requirements. So you can kind of see on this map, it's where it's colored. Those are the qualified locations. So these are low income or non-urban rural areas. So this is really to promote installation in areas where access to EV chargers may be limited. And this incentive covers about 2/3 of Americans. And so you can use Argonne National Laboratories locator tool to determine if your location falls under one of these qualified locations. And in order to claim this credit, you can do this on your federal tax return. You would use IRS form 8911, and this is for equipment that is placed in service during that tax year. And the tax credit allows taxpayers to carry any unused portion of the credit back for 1 year or forward for up to 20 years. So this means that if a taxpayer cannot use the full amount of the tax credit in the year it is claimed, they can apply the remaining portion to reduce tax liability in future years for up to 20 years after that credit was first claimed. Next slide. And so I think that's it. So
for a little bit of a Q&A, will the U.S. Department of Transportation be receptive to a public-private partnership, and how can we be most competitive?
That is a great question. Yes, very receptive to public-private partnership. Many of those funded in the first round that was awarded in January. I think that what you can really bring to the table when doing outreach to those, local government partners that are probably putting together their applications right now, is that you can really hit on that multifamily focus that this grant has. They want to make sure this infrastructure is accessible to as many people as possible. And I think, I would also recommend considering offering to be that 20% match, that non-federal match, which will make your commitment and interest in being part of that public agency application, really very strong, I think.
Perfect. Who should we be coordinating with at our local government partners?
Sure. I would today pick up the phone and reach out to the community's economic development folks, potentially their transportation, certainly their sustainability. But I think, it's we're about 4 weeks away from that deadline. So I would reach out today to try to navigate that process. If you have specific questions about a community, I'm happy to help you try to work through that. So feel free to reach out to me and I can make some recommendations.
Perfect. And if we purchase using our own money, can we be reimbursed with federal funds?
I'm afraid not. So federal funding is not available on a reimbursable basis. But if you're eager to get started, you can go ahead and make a purchase and begin to implement EV charging infrastructure in your community, and then also apply for federal funding to greatly expand that access.
Okay, great. And we have one person asking if they will be able to receive this, the recording and the information, because it's a lot to take in, and absolutely we'll be sending this to everyone as soon as we finish. And I have one more question. For a large multifamily workforce housing project that is under construction in a low income area in Miami, Florida, and has already purchased 127 chargers, what program, if any, would best work for this job based on the options discussed today?
Well, I have to say, if you've already made the purchase, you're not going to be eligible for this funding. So this is for projects where you've not already made the purchase.
yeah, I'd say for that one, possibly look at the 30C tax credits.
Great point. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, that seems to be all of the questions.
Right. Well, feel free to reach out. You all have our contact information.
Mhm.
Patty and Nicole and I are happy to help you sort of navigate this process, and also see what other options might be there for you all. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Perfect, great. And I'll be sending everyone this information after. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Patty, Amanda, Nicole, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thanks
Bye.
for joining, everybody.